So Prebisch hypothesis says that free trade may not be for the benefit of everybody. Under such circumstances, now one, we use this word Atmanirbharata, right? So India should become stronger from inside, and obviously our dependence on other countries should slowly come down.
You get those goods from outside, some goods which you develop here. So it's not complete blanket import substitution, it's an intelligent import substitution. We can't talk about Atmanirbhar in a world order which is completely obliterated using those policies, especially for geopolitical means. We also have to be tactical in our approach. Some sectors we'll have to open up, some sectors we'll have to bring those indispensability in those particular production chains.
But because this particular episode is for civil services aspirants, and because you have years of experience, I'd request both of you to shed light on those parts of this discussion that should concern the aspirants and the key takeaways of this particular debate.
Where you observe that there are trade wars increasing or a fragmented world order, what should be the strategy of Indian economy? New word, it's not a new concept, but it's a new word which can be clearly mentioned in the exam, or this can be asked in the prelims also.
So when we say the state has to be nimble, state has to take risks, state has to change according to what the global order is, the aspirant also has to do the same.
Hello everyone, welcome to this panel discussion, the second one which is based on Economic Survey 2025-26. In the last discussion, we talked about Shreya and Preya, that is choosing between two different types of priorities, populism and long-term growth. Today, we are going to look abroad, outward. Because in this changing world order, which is called fractured world order, what should be India's economic strategy? Now, the economic survey suggests that we should transition from what is called Swadeshi to strategic resilience, and then ultimately strategic indispensability. Now this trajectory is very difficult, no doubt in that. But what is more difficult is for the UPSC civil services aspirants to decode the meaning of this term. That's why we have with us today two eminent faculty members of Vision IS, Sudhir sir and Piyush sir, who are going to demystify this entire complex situation. So let's start this discussion. Hello sir. So let's start with you. So many complex terms have been used that I used in the beginning. Strategic indispensability, and then fractured global order, world order. So I would like you to explain what exactly is this fractured global order and how is it going to impact India's economic strategy?
Yeah. So, Charanjit, fractured global order right now, which we see, when we look at Prebisch hypothesis. So, Prebisch hypothesis says that free trade may not be for the benefit of everybody. So it says that something like always the developed countries are at an advantage because developed countries generally export manufacturing goods in comparison to the least developed countries. And these LDCs basically export agriculture commodities. And when people's incomes increase, there is a higher demand for manufacturing goods, but there is less demand, or these necessities like the agriculture products have inelastic demand. So therefore, this generally keeps the developed countries at an advantage. This was there from the beginning. But Adam Smith supports this free trade as a principle. But now what we observe is even the developed countries started looking inwards. Now they are also not talking about hyper-globalization or completely free trade. So now you are using trade as a weapon, or you want to use supply chain disruption as a mechanism to control other countries. So that is the reason we observe a new trend right now, which we call it as a fragmented global order. So what we observe is there is an increase in friendshoring. So more than something like just based on economic benefit, your decisions are taken based on geopolitical issues. So this is a clear transition which we observe. So under such circumstances, now one, we use this word Atmanirbharata, right? So India should become stronger from inside, and obviously our dependence on other countries should slowly come down. But at the same time, India cannot completely become Atmanirbhar immediately. So we need to have a strategy which is focusing on both the aspects. So that is what I believe. So when we talk about strategic indispensability, so I can give you a small example here. When we talk about making iPhone, okay, so the supply chain of iPhone, every component is coming from a different country. For example, let's say the battery is coming from France, assembling is done in China, R&D is done in California. The question comes up, in this global value chain or in this value chain of iPhone, where is India contributing? So when we talk about we becoming indispensable, are we part of the global value chain? Are we contributing? Can the world survive without India? This is what I mean. For example, China. Without China, there's no EV revolution. China has done that. China has become indispensable with respect to many aspects. Now, are we in that position? So India is doing well with respect to service sector, but when it comes to manufacturing, we are in the process of indispensability.
Thank you, sir. Now, Piyush sir has already set the context that everything that the world is going through. In this context, how would you illustrate strategic indispensability?
So when we have the reality of this fractured global order, when we reach to indispensability, first we have to talk about our resilience. So the survey talks about two things first, strategic resilience, and then it talks about strategic indispensability. Now when it talks about resilience, it first says that you need intelligent import substitution. That means you can't do import substitution in all sectors. There have to be some sectors where you have to depend on some other countries to get those goods. You get those goods from outside, some goods which you develop here. So it's not complete blanket import substitution, it's an intelligent import substitution. And once you do that, we are doing domestic production of certain goods. This domestic production, we also need certain resilience to it. What we mean by resilience, 2019, 2021, we witnessed COVID. Semiconductors stopped coming from Taiwan. There were a lot of supply chain disruptions. This is where we got exposed that we were dependent on something very critical from outside. It's not just that we built it here, we also need some buffer on it so that those shocks don't impact us in the short term. This is what the survey talks about when it says the strategic resilience part. That yes, there are going to be shocks in this global world, the fractured global world order, but we need to deal with it and we have to be prepared for it. That's the first part of it. The second part then comes to be the strategic indispensability. When we say indispensability, we have to sell something to the world which the world has to take from only us. We need certain goods. We have to be embedded in certain supply chains at certain points where India is important to the world. Right now, we are looking for those sectors developing strength, but this is the offensive strategy which we need to focus in the long term. So the present intelligence import, the substitution part, the resilience on it so that we are not affected by shocks, and then go on the offensive, build certain sectors where the world needs us. This is what we talk about, the strategic indispensability part. So this is where we can have tactical sectors, some sectors where we can do with the imports, some sectors where we build ourselves, and when we build ourselves, we scale up. We do the R&D there and we become indispensable for the world. This is how the survey talks about both these concepts. So if you see, this is a very big strategic shift. We can't talk about Atmanirbhar in a world order which is completely obliterated using those policies, especially for geopolitical names. We also have to be tactical in our approach. Some sectors we'll have to open up, some sectors we'll have to bring those indispensability in those particular production chains.
So as you mentioned that India needs to do a lot better when it comes to the export sector. So how do you rate India's current trade position, especially focus on the external sector?
So if you see the current, the export, the whole profile which we talk about in the external sector, we have been since 91 consistently doing very well in the service sector. We have very good IT sector which the world needs from us. We are building the global capability centers where the MNCs are themselves establishing the complete chain. Now this is something which we have been good at. But if we talk about the resilience in the service sector, that is something which is an issue which we need to tackle. Why? Because the manufacturing exports are missing. Manufacturing exports, this is where the current account balance is jittery. The cost for our debt also increases because of the problem of dollar here. So how do we then deal with this? We'll have to learn from the East Asian example. If you see the development of these East Asian countries, you start with Japan, then the colonies of Japan, say South Korea, Taiwan, China, they all have built it on manufacturing. And today they've built certain products where they're indispensable to the world. Whether you have Samsung coming from South Korea, you have Taiwan, TSMC, USMC building those semiconductors, and as sir mentioned, the EV revolution coming from China. So they've built certain things, and all of these things, what is the connecting point? Is the manufacturing prowess. This is something where we need to shift our focus. And if you see it from the external front, it is going to give us benefits, but the internal benefits are much better or are huge than what the external is. Because the service sector, as we know, conventionally has not been creating a lot of jobs. The skill, the entry point, the skill is quite high. Manufacturing is what can fill that gap. So we can shift our burden away from agriculture, bring it to manufacturing. So it solves both our problems. We'll get jobs from it, and we'll get that resilience and the indispensability part if we build on manufacturing big. So considering the present picture, we need to take that transition. We have to focus on manufacturing.
Thank you, sir. Now, Ramsudhir sir, as sir said, we cannot rely upon service sector, which is already doing good, but we cannot be complacent because we have to focus on manufacturing sector, and that needs innovation. And when you talk about innovation, comes this new concept of entrepreneurial state, which the economic survey mentions. And sometimes people equate this term with capitalist economy. Could you please shed light upon this new concept?
Yeah, Charanjit, when we talk about entrepreneurial state is not about a commercial state.
Right.
Basically, that is a state which starts taking risk. It will understand the risk as well as the problems that are there right now. For example, whenever there is a big risk coming up, the government will start aligning as per the risk. So, entrepreneurial state is one state which takes controlled risk, calculated risk. At the same time, it tries to align its policies on a regular basis based on the requirements. So, during difficult situation, it should not be paralyzed, but at least take baby steps. This is what is an entrepreneurial state. Now, when we talk about a manufacturing significance and the role of entrepreneurial state, for example, let's talk about South Korean example. Okay, so when we say India is a lower middle income country, China is an upper middle income country, South Korea is a high income nation. Now, when we observe, there are three things here, three I's we call it as. One is investment, two infusion, and third is innovation. So, innovation comes later. So, everybody is talking about innovation, but what did South Korea do first? So, we focused on investment in our second 5-year plan. Even today, we are talking much about investment. But we could have learned some technologies from other countries. When we talk about South Korea, South Korean engineers have gone to Japan, learned semiconductor technologies from Japan, and the licensing fees was paid by some companies of South Korea and then by the South Korean government. That's how South Korea was able to infuse that technology into mobile manufacturing, and that's how Samsung has come up. And Samsung, we know Samsung is a very big brand, and Koreans have crossed over Japan in terms of mobile manufacturing. This is what we call it as infusion. Then we start building an ecosystem. That is, we spend money on R&D, build the ecosystem, then we focus on innovation. That comes later. Now, India should focus on two things here. One, infusion, and two, innovation. But our problem is when it comes to R&D, our spending on R&D is hardly, let's say, 0.6% of GDP. And our private sector is still not spending much on research and development. For example, if I look at the balance sheets of TCS or Infosys are sitting on a lot of cash, but that money is not going into research and development. Okay, so we're talking about global capability centers, but most of the global capability centers might replace our Indian IT industry in the next few years because of not spending money on research and development. This is the negative part which I'm talking about. I'm talking about the private sector also. So it's a culmination of government policy, which is an entrepreneurial state, plus a private sector which is always focusing on innovation. For example, when we take Chinese companies, China, if a company is earning 2,000 crore profit, it is spending 4,000 crore on R&D. We're not expecting that much, but at least some amount of spending by the private entities. When you have a solid cash in your balance sheets visible, why is it that you're not spending is the question. So it's not just about the government. Of course, government also has a very important role that we're calling it as entrepreneurial state. But there's a role of the private player in terms of innovation. Even the private sector, including the service sector. Service sector also, it's not that service sector we have reached a certain level. There is a threat that is coming up in the next few years. That is the AI threat, and our global capability centers, these GCCs are replacing the jobs of Indian IT employees. That means the best talent is going to the foreign GCCs which are established in India. So this is one big problem. So it's as well as the individual. So it is the citizen plus the private sector plus the entrepreneurial state together. Only then we can move forward.
Thank you, sir. But ultimately, state has a big role to play, which is going to heighten the courage of the private sector. And as sir also talked about the Far East, and you also mentioned the special case of South Korea, state-backed industrial growth. So now the economic survey also points out another major flaw or constraint, which is the state capacity. Would you like to focus upon that?
Yeah, when I talk about state capacity, the economic survey talks about two things. One is how does the state handle the short-term risks, so which we are calling it as sprint. and then the long-term aspects. For example, if the oil price, suppose tomorrow Iran is going to be bombed, there's a high risk tension, or the Strait of Hormuz is closed, automatically the oil prices are going to shoot up. Under such circumstances, if oil shoots up, Indian economy is going to be affected because oil is a major raw material for many sectors. This is one important aspect. So, do we have the capacity or the reserve or the buffer so that we'll be able to handle such kind of threats? This is the immediate requirement.
Right.
Then something like, how do I build my reserves and infrastructure for the future? This is, we are talking about the marathon. So, the state capacity has to focus on both the things. One, immediate aspect, and then you're talking about the long-term strength, that is basically you're building the infrastructure and things like that. Now, even the state capacity talks about, for example, the economic survey says, how do we develop the skills of the individuals, skill development programs. Or when we talk about Zoho, to be very specific, there's a very popular example. Zoho works in a different style, though it is working in a rural village. Now you're identifying talent wherever possible and you're trying to inculcate, and they're spending money on research and development and they're focusing on innovation. So this is what is required from the state as well as the entrepreneurial side as well.
Sir, would you like to add anything to what sir said?
So I can add this institutional angle to state capacity.
Yes, please.
So when we talk about this, how is the state making decision? Why is bureaucracy hesitant in making any decision or reversing their decisions or trying to innovate on decisions? So this is where we face a lag, that we have such strict enforcement mechanisms that we are averse to risk taking. If you can't distinguish between a bona fide mistake and a malified intention, the bureaucrat is not going to make a decision because he knows there are enforcement agencies which are looking out for him. So if you can't create an environment where you can take risk without facing the repercussion of enforcement, we can't have that entrepreneurial state. It has to have been nimble decision making. You have to change your decisions and you have to constantly decide. So this is where the entrepreneurial state has to build that capacity. We can't work on the 1980s era where the decisions are not being taken just because I think I'll be caught if the decision goes wrong.
Correct.
And when we talk about the state capacity, it's also what is your perspective of the decision? Why are you taking this decision? There could be some particular policies which are going to give you certain benefits in the short term, but long term might compromise your growth. So when sir mentioned innovation, you have to keep an eye towards the longer growth, long duration growth, and not just the immediate benefits you are going to get. So if we allow you to take those risks, you have to decide to keep a balance that yes, short term benefits exist, but there are long term costs. So why not go for the long-term benefits even if it is not within the 5-year framework? This is what we talk about, the state capacity. The second aspect to this is the citizen behavior. Now the state is going to invest most of its resources in disciplining the citizen, where the citizen has to be told what to do and what not to do. We are taking away a lot of our capacity towards citizen or regulating citizen behavior. Now a policeman should not stand on a road and tell you that you should not cross the red light. This is something which the citizen has to do it on themselves. This is what the survey talks about. There has to be some domestic behavior, there has to be some civic sense which people need to have. We reduce our enforcement cost on that. Because if you keep on creating that friction, we become a low trust society, and a low trust society cannot have good investments, cannot have business, cannot build for the long run. So the trust between the citizen themselves, the trust between the citizen and the government has to increase. So it's not just the government which has to come forward when you talk about risk taking in terms of entrepreneurial state. It has to be the citizens also to take a step forward and solve some of their own problems themselves without the state intervening in it. The policeman can solve a number of other issues if he's not standing on the road and telling you not to cross the red light. You have to stand on the red light. This is as basic as it gets. This is coming from both ends, entrepreneurial state and citizen behavior. I think the survey also mentions about building that good domestic behavior in the citizens. Now, this is not something which in 2026 the survey should be telling you, but it is a lacuna and we need to work on it. Both ways, then we get this in entrepreneurial state and the long-term innovation which we are looking for.
So thank you, sir. Now everything boils down to, like, there is need to be this threefold participation: citizenry, state, and entrepreneurs. That means the businessmen. But because this particular episode is for civil services aspirants, and because you have years of experience, I'd request both of you to shed light on those parts of this discussion that should concern the aspirants and the key takeaways of this particular debate. Starting with you, sir.
So there was a mains question recently, like where you observe that there are trade wars increasing, or a fragmented world order, what should be the strategy of Indian economy? Okay, so such kind of questions actually we can probably use a lot of content from economic survey. For example, how do you focus on MSMEs? How do you reduce your dependence on other supply chains? That means, can MSMEs act as backward and forward integrations for, that means can MSMEs supply raw materials for Indian manufacturing, etc. So these are all, these things are very clearly mentioned. And then talking about entrepreneurial state, it's a new concept, new word. It's not a new concept, but it's a new word which can be clearly mentioned in the exam, or this can be asked in the prelims also. So entrepreneurial state is something like a risk-taking state, a state which is not bounded by friction, or a state basically we can say which promotes more entrepreneurship. So all these are very important right now when we are talking about India as India Viksit Bharat, or India becoming a developed nation by 2047. So these are some very important areas which we can focus on.
Piyush, sir.
I think the takeaways the survey talks about and we have done in the discussion, I'll draw a link between the preparation and what the fractured global order and resilience is. Just like we have a global order which is very uncertain, it's constantly evolving. The exam is uncertain, the exam is constantly evolving. So when we say the state has to be nimble, state has to take risks, state has to change according to what the global order is, the aspirant also has to do the same. Your strategy cannot be stuck in 2022 when the exam is constantly changed every year. Keep on evolving the strategy, take risk, build your capacity, you need resilience, and if you want selection, you have to be indispensable. This is what my key takeaway would be from this.
Thank you, sir. Now, dear aspirants, you understood what the entire discussion was all about. No doubt, in this fractured world order, India needs to come up with its own individualistic strategy so that it can absorb the shocks of the supply chain related shocks and other shocks. And as sir summarized in a very beautiful manner, because state needs to improve its capacity to take risks, and you should also be in a position to innovate. So thank you so much. You can also contribute to this discussion by sharing your comments. Wish you all the very best.